The gunshot that killed Diana's father was the last sound she ever wanted to owe anyone for. And when the smoke cleared in their burned-out homestead near Beaver, Utah, she swore she would never ask another living soul for help again. The year was 1881, and the high desert landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, unforgiving and beautiful in equal measure. Diana Preston stood among the ashes of what had been her family's modest ranch, her 20-year-old hands blistered from digging the grave herself. The outlaws who had ridden through 3 days prior had taken everything of value, burned what they could not carry, and left her father bleeding out in the doorway. She had held his hand as he died, and his last words had been an apology for leaving her with nothing. But nothing was better than debt. Nothing meant she owed no one. Nothing meant freedom in its own cruel way. She salvaged what she could: a scorched tin cup, a knife with a charred handle, a blanket that smelled of smoke. Her father's horse had run off during the attack, and the chickens were all dead. The nearest neighbor was 8 miles away, but Diana had no intention of walking that direction. Asking for help meant becoming beholden, meant obligating herself to repay kindness she could never afford to return. Her mother had died that way, crushed under the weight of Owing the town doctor, the mercantile owner, the women who brought soup, and expected endless gratitude in return. Diana would starve before she asked for anything. She walked south instead toward the small town of Beaver, with the idea that she might find work that required no charity, no advance, no kindness that would chain her to someone else's expectations. Her dark hair hung in a braid down her back, and her dress was smoke-stained and torn at the hem. She carried nothing but the knife tucked into her boot and a determination that burned hotter than the Utah sun overhead. The town came into view after 4 hours of walking. Beaver sat in a valley surrounded by rust-colored hills, a collection of wooden buildings that seemed to shimmer in the afternoon heat. The main street was wide and dusty, lined with a general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, and a handful of other establishments. Horses stood tied to hitching posts, their tails swishing at flies. A few people moved along the boardwalks, going about their business with the slow, deliberate pace of those accustomed to the desert heat. Diana's throat was parched, but she walked past the water trough without stopping. Drinking from it felt too much like taking something that was not explicitly hers. Instead, she headed toward the general store, thinking she might inquire about work in exchange for food, and perhaps a place to sleep. Not asking for charity, just offering labor for fair payment. The store was dim and cool inside, crowded with barrels of flour and sugar, shelves lined with canned goods and bolts of fabric. A thin man with spectacles stood behind the counter, and he looked up as Diana entered. "Help you?" he asked, his tone neither friendly nor unfriendly. "I am looking for work," Diana said, keeping her voice steady. "I can clean, organize stock, whatever needs doing. I am not asking for charity, just fair wages." The man looked her over, taking in her appearance. "You're not from around here." "My father had a ranch north of here. He passed recently." She said no more than necessary, unwilling to invite pity. "I am sorry for your loss," the man said, though his expression did not change much. "I do not need help right now. You might try the boarding house. Mrs. Calloway sometimes needs an extra set of hands." Diana nodded and turned to leave, but as she reached the door, the man called after her. "There is a ranch about 2 miles west of town. The Crossbar X owner is always looking for help during the season. Of course, it is a cattle operation, so the work is hard." "Thank you," Diana said, and stepped back out into the blazing sunlight. She found the boarding house easily enough. It was a 2-story building with a covered porch, painted white but weathered by wind and sand. A sign hanging from the eave read "Calloway's Boarding House" in faded letters. Diana climbed the steps and knocked on the door. A woman in her 50s answered, wiping her hands on her apron. She had graying hair pinned up in a bun and sharp blue eyes that assessed Diana in an instant. "Yes?" "The man at the general store said you might need help," Diana said. "I can work in exchange for room and board." Mrs. Calloway's expression softened slightly. You look like you have been through something." Diana stiffened. "I am offering work, not asking for sympathy." "Fair enough," Mrs. Calloway said, and Diana appreciated that she did not push. "I could use someone to help with laundry and cleaning. The room would be small, up in the attic, and meals would be plain, but it is honest work for honest pay." "That suits me fine," Diana said. Mrs. Calloway stepped aside to let her in. "You can start tomorrow. For tonight, you look like you need a meal and rest. No charge for that. Consider it a welcome." Diana hesitated, the offer sitting uncomfortably in her chest. "I would rather start working today." "Then it is earned." The older woman studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. There is a pile of linens that needs washing out back. You can start there, and then we will have supper." Diana followed her through the boarding house, past a sitting room where two men played cards, and up a narrow staircase to the attic room. It was small, as promised, with a slanted ceiling and a single window that looked out over the town. A bed, a washstand, and a trunk were the only furnishings. It was more than Diana had expected and exactly what she needed. She set to work immediately, hauling water from the pump and scrubbing the linens until her hands were raw. The physical labor felt good, purposeful. It was something she could control, something that required no explanation or vulnerability. By the time the sun began to sink toward the western hills, she had washed and hung 2 loads of laundry, and her muscles ached in a satisfying way. Mrs. Calloway called her in for supper, and Diana sat at the long table in the dining room with the other boarders. There were 5 of them, 2 men who worked at the mine north of town, a traveling salesman, an elderly woman who seemed to be a permanent resident, and a young man who said little and kept his eyes on his plate. The food was simple but plentiful. Beef stew, bread, and canned peaches for dessert. Diana ate slowly, savoring each bite, aware that this was the first real meal she had eaten in days. No one asked her questions, which she appreciated. Mrs. Calloway had clearly instructed them to leave her be, or perhaps they were simply accustomed to people arriving in Beaver with stories they did not want to share. After supper, Diana climbed the stairs to her attic room and lay down on the narrow bed. Through the window, she could see the first stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. She thought of her father, buried in the ashes of their ranch, and felt the familiar tightness in her chest. But she did not cry. Crying felt like asking the universe for comfort, and she had learned that the universe did not give anything without expecting something in return. She fell asleep to the sound of voices drifting up from the saloon down the street, and for the first time in days, she felt almost safe. Diana settled into a rhythm over the following weeks. She woke before dawn, helped Mrs. Calloway prepare breakfast for the boarders, then spent the day washing linens, scrubbing floors, and mending torn sheets. The work was endless and exhausting, but it was hers. She earned every meal, every night in the attic room, and owed nothing beyond her labor. Mrs. Calloway was a fair employer, neither overly kind nor harsh. She paid Diana a small wage in addition to room and board, and Diana saved every penny in a small pouch she kept hidden under the floorboards. She had no clear plan for the money yet, but having it felt like a measure of security, a buffer against the world. The town of Beaver was small enough that everyone knew everyone else's business, but large enough that a newcomer could remain relatively anonymous if she kept to herself. Diana did exactly that. She spoke when spoken to, smiled politely when necessary, but never lingered in conversation. She did not visit the saloon or attend the Sunday services at the small church on the edge of town. She existed on the periphery, and that was how she preferred it. It was on a Saturday afternoon in late September when she first saw Quinton Xander. She had gone to the general store to pick up supplies for Mrs. Calloway, and as she stepped out onto the boardwalk, arms full of parcels, she collided with someone coming around the corner. The impact sent her packages tumbling to the ground, and she gasped in frustration as a bag of flour split open, spilling white powder across the wooden planks. "Damn it," she muttered, dropping to her knees to try to salvage what she could. "I am sorry. That was entirely my fault." The voice was deep, and genuinely apologetic. A pair of boots appeared in her line of vision, well worn and dusty. "Let me help." "I can manage," Diana said quickly, not looking up. But the man was already crouching beside her, scooping flour back into the torn bag with his hands. "This is not going to hold," he said. "Wait here. I will get another bag." Before Diana could protest, he stood and disappeared back into the store. She sat back on her heels, annoyed at herself for being clumsy and at him for insisting on helping. She did not want help. She did not want to owe anyone anything. He returned a moment later with a fresh bag of flour and a sturdy crate. "Here. This will make it easier to carry everything," he said, transferring her parcels into the crate. "And I already paid for the flour, so do not worry about that." Diana stood quickly, her jaw tightening. "I did not ask you to do that." He looked up at her then, and she got her first good look at him. He was tall, perhaps 24 or 25, with dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck and eyes the color of strong coffee. His face was tanned from hours in the sun, and there was a scar along his jawline, faint but noticeable. He wore a simple shirt, vest, and denim trousers, and a dusty hat hung from a cord around his neck. "I know you did not ask," he said, his tone easy and without expectation, "but I caused the problem, so it is only right that I fix it." "I will pay you back," Diana said firmly. He shook his head, already lifting the crate. "No need. Where are you headed? I will carry this for you." "I said I will pay you back," Diana repeated, her voice sharper than she intended. He paused, studying her with an expression she could not quite read. "All right," he said finally, "but there is no rush. Whenever you are able." He handed her the crate, careful not to let their hands touch. "Have a good day." He tipped his head politely and walked away, his long strides carrying him down the street before Diana could think of a response. She stood there, holding the crate, feeling a confusing mix of irritation and something else she could not name. That evening she asked Mrs. Calloway about him. "There was a man in town today, tall, dark hair, maybe mid-20s. He paid for a bag of flour after I spilled mine. Do you know who he is?" "Mrs." Calloway smiled knowingly. "That sounds like Quinton Xander. He runs the Crossbar X Ranch west of town. Good man from what I hear. Keeps to himself mostly, but folks say he is fair to his workers and does not tolerate trouble." "What do you know about him?" Diana asked, trying to sound casual. "Not much," Mrs. Calloway admitted. "He showed up in Beaver about 3 years ago, bought the ranch from old Mr. Hendricks, and has been building it up ever since. He has a few hands working for him, runs cattle and horses. I have heard he is a hard worker, not much for socializing. Why do you ask?" "Just curious," Diana said. "He seemed different." Mrs. Calloway gave her a knowing look but said nothing more. Diana could not stop thinking about the encounter. It bothered her that Quinton Xander had paid for the flour and refused repayment. It bothered her even more that he had walked away without making her feel guilty or indebted. Most people, in her experience, made a show of their generosity, expecting gratitude and acknowledgement. But Quinton had simply fixed the problem and moved on, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She decided she would find a way to repay him, to clear the debt so she would not have to think about it anymore. The next time she went into town, she stopped by the general store and asked the clerk how much a bag of flour cost. Then she counted out the coins from her hidden pouch and set them aside. She would find an opportunity to return the money to Quinton Xander, and that would be the end of it. But opportunities, she discovered, did not present themselves as easily as she hoped. 2 weeks passed before she saw him again. She was walking back from the mercantile, carrying a basket of thread and fabric scraps Mrs. Calloway had asked her to pick up, when she noticed a commotion near the livery stable. A horse was rearing and bucking, its eyes rolling in panic, while a young boy tried desperately to hold onto the reins. A small crowd had gathered, people shouting advice, but no one stepping forward to help. Diana set down her basket and moved closer, her heart pounding. The boy could not have been more than 12, and he was clearly in over his head. The horse was going to hurt him or itself if someone did not intervene. Before she could think better of it, Quinton Xander appeared from the stable, moving with calm, deliberate purpose. He spoke in a low, steady voice, words Diana could not make out from where she stood, and approached the horse slowly. The animal tossed its head, nostrils flaring, but Quinton did not flinch. He reached out a hand, letting the horse catch his scent, and continued speaking in that same soothing tone. Gradually, the horse began to calm. Its movements became less frantic, and after a few tense moments, it allowed Quinton to take the reins from the boy. He led the horse in a slow circle, keeping his movements smooth and non-threatening, until the animal was standing still, its sides heaving, but its panic subsided. The crowd dispersed, and the boy thanked Quinton profusely before leading the horse back into the stable. Quinton watched them go, then turned and caught sight of Diana standing a few feet away. "You have a way with horses," she said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. He walked over to her, brushing dust from his hands. "Just a matter of patience. That horse was scared, not mean. Someone probably treated it rough and it learned to fight back." Diana understood that feeling more than she cared to admit. "It was good of you to step in." "Anyone would have done the same," Quinton said, though they both knew that was not true. Diana reached into her pocket and pulled out the coin she had been carrying for the past 2 weeks. "This is for the flour," she said, holding them out to him. Quinton looked at the coins but did not take them. "I told you there is no need." "And I told you I would pay you back," Diana said, her voice firm. "I do not want to owe anyone." Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of understanding. "All right," he said quietly. He took the coins and slipped them into his pocket without counting them. "Debt paid, then." "Thank you," Diana said, feeling a weight lift from her chest. Quinton nodded. "Have a good day, Miss Preston, Diana Preston?" "Miss Preston." He tipped his head and walked back toward the stable. Diana picked up her basket and continued on her way, but she felt his gaze on her back, and for reasons she could not explain, it did not feel intrusive or unwelcome. The autumn days grew shorter and cooler, and Diana continued her work at the boarding house. She was content in her own way, though content felt like too strong a word. She was surviving, managing, existing. She owed nothing to anyone, and that was enough. But Quinton Xander seemed to have a way of appearing when she least expected it. She saw him at the mercantile purchasing supplies for his ranch. She saw him at the livery speaking with the stable hand about a lame horse. She saw him at the saloon, though he never went inside, just stood on the boardwalk talking to one of his ranch hands. And each time, he acknowledged her with a polite nod or a brief greeting, never lingering, never pushing for conversation. It was as if he understood her need for distance and respected it without question. One crisp October morning, Diana was hanging laundry in the yard behind the boarding house when Mrs. Calloway came out, wringing her hands nervously. "Diana, I need to ask you a favor." Diana paused, a wet sheet draped over her arm. The word favor made her uneasy, but she owed Mrs. Calloway her livelihood, so she nodded. "What do you need?" "My sister over in Milford is ill, and I need to go help her for a few days. I hate to leave you alone with the boarding house, but I do not have much choice. Do you think you could manage things while I'm gone? I will pay you extra, of course." Diana considered. It would mean more work, but it was work she was capable of doing. And Mrs. Calloway was not asking for charity. She was offering fair compensation. "I can manage," she said. Mrs. Calloway looked relieved. "Thank you, dear. I will leave first thing tomorrow morning. The stage comes through at 7. I should be back by the end of the week." True to her word, Mrs. Calloway departed the next morning, and Diana found herself in charge of the boarding house. It was more responsibility than she had expected. In addition to the usual cleaning and laundry, she had to prepare meals for the boarders, manage the accounts, and handle any issues that arose. But she threw herself into the work, grateful for the distraction. The first 2 days passed without incident. The boarders were easy to please, and Diana managed to keep up with the cooking and cleaning. But on the third day, one of the miners came down with a fever, and Diana spent the afternoon tending to him, bringing him water and cool cloths for his forehead. She had no medical training, but she remembered what her mother had done when she and her father had been sick years ago. By evening, the miner's fever had broken and Diana was exhausted. She had not eaten all day, too busy to stop for a meal, and she was just sitting down to a plate of leftover stew when there was a knock at the front door. She opened it to find Quinton Xander standing on the porch, holding a crate filled with vegetables and a burlap sack that smelled of fresh bread. "Evening, Miss Preston," he said. "I heard Mrs. Calloway was out of town, and I thought you might be able to use these. My garden produced more than I can use before winter, and it seems a shame to let it go to waste." Diana stared at the crate, her stomach twisting. "I cannot accept that." "Why not?" Quinton asked, his tone genuinely curious. "Because I did not ask for it, and I have nothing to give you in return." Quinton set the crate down on the porch. "I am not asking for anything in return. I just have extra, and it would be a waste to let it rot. If you do not want it, I can take it to the church, but I thought you might find it useful." Diana wanted to refuse, but the practical part of her brain pointed out that she was feeding 7 people and running low on supplies. The vegetables would be appreciated by the boarders, and it would save her a trip to the mercantile. "I will pay you for them," she said finally. Quinton shook his head. "They are from my garden, not the store. There is no price. Just take them, Miss Preston. It is not charity, just one neighbor helping another." He turned and walked down the steps before she could argue further, disappearing into the twilight. Diana stood on the porch, looking down at the crate, feeling the familiar discomfort of receiving something she had not earned. But she also felt something else, something she did not have a name for. She brought the crate inside and spent the next hour sorting through the vegetables, carrots, potatoes, squash, onions. Everything was fresh and carefully packed. The bread was still warm, wrapped in a clean cloth. She used the vegetables to make a hearty soup for the next day's meal, and the boarders praised her cooking at supper. That night, lying in her attic room, Diana thought about Quinton Xander and the way he gave without expecting anything in return. It unsettled her because it defied everything she had come to believe about the world. In her experience, kindness always came with strings attached, but Quinton's kindness felt different, like rain that fell without asking permission, nourishing the earth simply because that was what rain did. She did not know what to make of it. Mrs. Calloway returned at the end of the week, full of gratitude for Diana's hard work. "You did a wonderful job," she said, pressing a few extra coins into Diana's hand. "The boarders have been singing your praises." Diana accepted the money, pleased that she had earned it fairly. Life returned to its normal rhythm, and she tried not to think too much about Quinton Xander. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. It was mid-November when the first snow began to fall, dusting the red hills around Beaver with white. Diana was at the mercantile purchasing lamp oil when she overheard 2 men talking near the counter. "Heard the Crossbar X lost half their herd in that storm last week," one of them said. "Quinton Xander is going to have a hard time making it through the winter." "Shame," the other man replied. "He is a good man, works harder than anyone I know." Diana felt an unexpected pang of concern. She told herself it was none of her business, that Quinton Xander could take care of himself, but the thought of him struggling nagged at her throughout the day. That evening, she counted the money in her hidden pouch. She had saved nearly $30, more than she had ever had at one time. It was enough to survive on if she needed to leave Beaver, enough to start over somewhere else, but it was also enough to help someone in need. She wrestled with the decision for 2 days. Helping Quinton would mean giving away money she had earned, money that represented her security and independence. But he had given to her without asking for anything in return, and the imbalance gnawed at her. Finally, she made her decision. She wrapped the money in a piece of cloth, addressed it to Quinton Xander, and left it at the general store with instructions for the clerk to deliver it to the Crossbar X Ranch. She did not include a note. She did not want him to know it was from her. For a few days she felt lighter, as if she had balanced some cosmic scale. But then a week later, Quinton appeared at the boarding house. Mrs. Calloway answered the door and called for Diana. "Someone here to see you." Diana came down the stairs, wiping her hands on her apron, and stopped when she saw Quinton standing in the entryway. He was holding the cloth-wrapped bundle of money. "Can we talk?" he asked. Diana glanced at Mrs. Calloway, who discreetly disappeared into the kitchen. Diana stepped outside onto the porch, closing the door behind her. "How did you know it was from me?" she asked. "The clerk at the store mentioned a young woman matching your description," Quinton said. He held out the money. "I cannot accept this." "Why not?" Diana asked, echoing his own words from weeks ago. "You needed it." "Need and want are different things," Quinton said. "I appreciate the thought, but this is yours. You earned it." "And you gave me vegetables and bread," Diana countered. "Why is it acceptable for you to give but not for me?" Quinton was quiet for a moment, then he smiled, a slow, genuine expression that softened his entire face. "Fair point." They stood there in the cold evening air, the bundle of money between them, and Diana realized they had reached an impasse. Neither of them wanted to take from the other, but neither wanted the other to suffer. "What if we made a deal?" Quinton said. "I will keep half of this and you keep the other half. That way we are both giving and both receiving, equal." Diana considered. It was not perfect, but it was a compromise she could live with. "All right," Quinton unwrapped the cloth and counted out half the coins, then handed the rest back to Diana. "Equal," he said. "Equal," Diana agreed. He looked at her for a long moment, and there was something in his eyes that made her heart beat faster. "You are a stubborn woman, Diana Preston." "So I have been told," she said. "I like that about you." He tipped his hat. "Good night." He walked away, and Diana stood on the porch, watching him until he disappeared into the darkness. Her hand closed around the coins, and she felt the strangest sensation, as if something inside her was beginning to thaw. Winter settled over Beaver with a quiet persistence. Snow fell in sporadic bursts, covering the desert landscape in a thin layer of white that melted by midday and returned by evening. The boarding house was cold, and Diana spent her mornings stoking the fire and her evenings huddled close to it, mending linens by lamplight. Quinton began appearing more frequently in town, and each time he found a reason to speak with Diana. He would stop by the boarding house under the pretense of checking on Mrs. Calloway, or he would appear at the Mercantile when Diana was shopping, offering to carry her parcels. She noticed that he never made her feel obligated. He simply showed up, offered help, and left if she declined, but increasingly she did not decline. One snowy afternoon in December, Quinton invited her to see his ranch. "I would like to show you what your money helped save," he said, his tone light but sincere. "If you are interested." Diana hesitated. Visiting his ranch felt personal, like crossing a line she had been careful to maintain, but she was curious, and she trusted him in a way she had not trusted anyone in a long time. "All right," she said. He borrowed a wagon from the livery, and they drove west out of town, the horse's breath misting in the cold air. The Crossbar X Ranch sat in a wide valley surrounded by rolling hills dotted with juniper and sagebrush. The main house was modest but well built, with a sturdy barn and several corrals. Cattle grazed in the distance, their dark shapes stark against the snow. "It is not much," Quinton said, as he helped her down from the wagon, "but it is mine." "It is beautiful," Diana said, and she meant it. There was something peaceful about the place, something that felt solid and enduring. He showed her around, introducing her to his two ranch hands, both young men who treated Quinton with obvious respect. He showed her the barn, where several horses stood in their stalls, and the cattle pens, where the surviving herd was kept during the winter months. He spoke about his plans for the spring, his hopes to expand the herd and improve the grazing land. Diana listened, fascinated by his passion and the quiet pride he took in his work. She realized that Quinton Xander was a man who built things, who invested in the future, who believed in something beyond mere survival. They ended up in the main house, where Quinton made coffee and they sat by the fire. The house was sparsely furnished but clean, with a practical layout that spoke of function over form. "Why did you come to Beaver?" Diana asked, cradling the warm cup in her hands. Quinton gazed into the fire. "I grew up in Texas, on a ranch much bigger than this one. My father owned it, and it was supposed to pass to me and my brothers. But my father died when I was 20, and the ranch got caught up in legal disputes. By the time everything was settled, there was nothing left. I decided to start over somewhere new, somewhere I could build something of my own. Do you miss Texas? Diana asked. Sometimes, Quinton admitted, but I do not miss the fights, the greed. Out here, things are simpler, harder but simpler. Diana understood that more than he could know. I lost my father too, she said quietly. Outlaws burned our ranch and killed him. I buried him by myself. Quinton looked at her, his expression pained. I am sorry. That is a terrible thing to go through alone. I did not want anyone's pity, Diana said. Pity comes with expectations. What about friendship? Quinton asked. Does that come with expectations? Diana met his gaze. I do not know. I have not had much experience with friendship. Neither have I, Quinton said, but I would like to try, if you would. The offer hung in the air between them, simple and sincere. Diana felt the familiar urge to pull back, to protect herself from the potential cost of connection. But she also felt something else, a longing for companionship, for someone who understood her without judgment. I would like that too, she said. Quinton smiled, and the warmth of it filled the room. They spent the rest of the afternoon talking, sharing stories of their pasts, their dreams, their fears. Diana told him about her mother's death, the crushing weight of debt that had consumed her family. Quinton told her about his brothers, scattered across the country now, and the loneliness of building a life from scratch. By the time Quinton drove her back to town, the sun was setting, painting the snow-covered hills in shades of gold and pink. Diana felt something shift inside her, a small crack in the armor she had built around her heart. As winter deepened, Diana and Quinton's friendship grew. He visited her in town, and she visited his ranch. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, and Diana discovered that Quinton was easy to be with. He did not push her to share more than she was comfortable with, and he never made her feel like she owed him for his time or attention. She also discovered that she was falling in love with him. Though she tried to deny it at first, love felt dangerous, like another form of debt, a vulnerability she could not afford. But Quinton's steady presence wore down her defenses. He showed her, through his actions, that giving did not have to create obligation, and receiving did not have to come with strings. One cold January evening they were sitting in his parlor, the fire crackling in the hearth, when Quinton reached across the space between them and took her hand. Diana, he said, his voice low and serious. I know you value your independence, and I respect that. But I need you to know how I feel about you. I am in love with you. I have been for a while now. Diana's breath caught. She had known on some level that this moment was coming, but hearing the words still shook her. I do not expect anything from you, Quinton continued. I'm not trying to create a debt or make you feel obligated. I just wanted you to know, because hiding it was starting to feel dishonest. Diana looked down at their joined hands. His palm was warm and calloused, steady and strong. I am afraid, she admitted. Loving someone means owing them. It means being vulnerable in a way I do not know if I can handle. Loving someone means sharing, Quinton said gently, not owing. You do not owe me anything, Diana. Not for the flour, not for the vegetables, not for my friendship. Those were gifts freely given. And my love is the same. It is yours. No strings attached. Diana felt tears prick her eyes. The first tears she had allowed herself in months. I do not know how to accept that, she whispered. Then let me show you, Quinton said. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. A gesture so tender, it broke something inside her. I love you too, Diana said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. I have been fighting it, but I do. I love you. Quinton pulled her into his arms, and Diana let herself be held, let herself feel the warmth and safety of his embrace. It was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time, like stepping off a cliff and discovering she could fly. They sat like that for a long time, wrapped in each other and the glow of the fire, and for the first time in her life, Diana felt like she truly belonged somewhere. Their courtship was unconventional by the standards of the time, but it suited them both. Diana continued working at the boarding house, and Quinton continued running his ranch. They saw each other as often as they could, stealing moments together in the evenings and on Sundays. Quinton never pressured her to give up her independence or her work, and Diana found herself relaxing into the relationship, trusting that his love was exactly what he claimed, a gift, not a transaction. In March, Quinton asked her to marry him. They were standing on the porch of his ranch house, watching the sunset paint the hills in shades of orange and purple. "I want to spend my life with you," he said, holding both her hands in his. "I want to build a future together as partners, equal partners. What do you say?" Diana's heart swelled. "Yes," she said, smiling through happy tears. "Yes, I will marry you." They were wed in April, in a small ceremony at the church in Beaver. Mrs. Calloway stood as Diana's witness, and one of Quinton's ranch hands stood for him. Diana wore a simple dress she had sewn herself, and Quinton wore his best suit. The preacher spoke about love and commitment, and when Quinton slipped the ring onto Diana's finger, she felt a sense of peace she had never known. After the ceremony, they returned to the Crossbar X, and Diana began her new life as a rancher's wife. It was hard work, but it was work she chose, and that made all the difference. She helped Quinton manage the ranch, tending to the animals, keeping the books, and making improvements to the house. They worked side by side, and in the evenings they sat together by the fire, planning for the future. The first year of their marriage was filled with challenges. A drought struck in the summer, and they lost several head of cattle. But they weathered it together, finding creative solutions and supporting each other through the difficult times. Diana learned that partnership meant sharing both the burdens and the joys, and that giving and receiving could be balanced when both people were committed to equality. In the spring of 1883, Diana discovered she was pregnant. She told Quinton one evening as they sat on the porch watching the stars. "We are going to have a baby," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of excitement and fear. Quinton's face lit up with joy. "A baby," he repeated, pulling her into his arms. "Diana, that is wonderful." "I am scared," she admitted. "What if I'm not a good mother?" "You will be an amazing mother," Quinton said firmly, "because you know what it is like to struggle, and you will teach our child strength and independence, and you will not do it alone. We will do it together." Diana held on to him, drawing strength from his certainty. "Together," she echoed. Their son was born in December during a snowstorm that blanketed the ranch in white. The labor was long and difficult, but Diana was strong, and with the help of the midwife from town, she brought a healthy baby boy into the world. They named him Thomas, after Quinton's father, and he had his mother's dark hair and his father's brown eyes. Holding Thomas in her arms for the first time, Diana felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. She had spent so much of her life afraid of owing and being owed, but this tiny person demanded nothing and gave everything. He was a gift, pure and simple, and she vowed to teach him that love was not a transaction but a choice. The years that followed were filled with hard work and happiness. The ranch prospered, and Diana and Quinton built a life that was richer than either of them had imagined. Thomas grew into a curious, energetic boy, and Diana discovered that motherhood was both harder and more rewarding than she had expected. In 1885, they had a daughter, whom they named Clara. She had her father's calm temperament and her mother's determination, and she completed their family in a way Diana had not known was missing. As the children grew, Diana taught them the lessons she had learned. She taught them to work hard, to value independence, but also to accept help when it was offered freely. She taught them that love was not about owing, but about sharing, about building something together that was greater than the sum of its parts. Quinton was a devoted father, patient and kind, and he showed his children by example what it meant to give without expecting anything in return. He taught Thomas to care for the animals and the land, and he taught Clara to ride and rope with the same skill as any ranch hand. He treated his children as equals, respecting their thoughts and feelings, and they adored him for it. Diana and Quinton's love deepened over the years, becoming a steady, enduring force that anchored their family. They had their disagreements, as all couples do, but they faced them together, always returning to the foundation of mutual respect and trust they had built. One evening, when Diana was in her early 40s and the children were nearly grown, she and Quinton sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the hills. It was a ritual they had maintained for over 20 years, a moment of peace at the end of each day. "Do you ever regret it?" Quinton asked. "Marrying me, giving up your independence?" Diana looked at him surprised. "I did not give up my independence. I chose to share my life with you. There is a difference." Quinton smiled. "I am glad you see it that way." "You taught me that," Diana said. "You showed me that I could be strong and independent and still let myself be loved. That was the greatest gift you ever gave me." Quinton took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "You gave me something too. You taught me that love does not have to be complicated. It just has to be honest." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the sky turned from gold to pink to deep purple. The ranch spread out before them, a testament to years of hard work and shared dreams. In the distance, they could hear Thomas and Clara laughing as they finished the evening chores. "We did all right," Diana said quietly. "We did better than all right," Quinton replied. "We built a life. Together." Diana leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the warmth of his body and the steady beat of his heart. She thought about the girl she had been, standing in the ashes of her father's ranch, swearing she would never ask for anything, never owe anyone. That girl had been broken and afraid, unable to see that there was a difference between dependence and partnership. But Quinton had shown her, not by taking away her independence, but by respecting it, not by demanding her gratitude, but by giving freely. He had loved her without conditions, and in doing so, he had given her the freedom to love him back. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of their children's lives. Thomas married a kind woman from a neighboring ranch, and they gave Diana and Quinton their first grandchild, a girl they named Emily. Clara followed her own path, choosing to study teaching and eventually opening a small school in Beaver where she educated the children of miners and ranchers alike. Diana and Quinton grew old together, their hair turning gray, their bodies slowing, but their spirits remaining strong. They still worked the ranch, though Thomas had taken over most of the day-to-day operations. They still sat on the porch each evening, watching the sunset and talking about the day. One spring evening when Diana was 62 and Quinton 66, they sat together as usual, wrapped in blankets against the cool air. The hills were green with new growth, and the cattle grazed peacefully in the distance. "I have been thinking," Quinton said, his voice thoughtful, "about legacy, about what we leave behind." "What brought that on?" Diana asked, though she had been having similar thoughts herself lately. "Thomas is doing well with the ranch. Clara is making a difference in the community. We have grandchildren who will carry on our name, but I wonder if that is enough, if there is something more we should be doing." Diana considered. "I think our legacy is not just in what we built, but in how we built it. We showed our children that strength does not mean standing alone, that accepting help is not weakness, that love is a gift, not a debt." "That is a good legacy," Quinton agreed. He reached over and took her hand, as he had done countless times over the years. "I am proud of what we have done, Diana, but mostly, I am proud that I got to do it with you." Diana felt the familiar warmth spread through her chest, the same warmth she had felt that first time Quinton held her hand in his parlor all those years ago. "I am proud too," she said. "You changed my life, Quinton. You taught me how to be loved. And you taught me how to love without conditions," Quinton said. "We were good for each other." "We still are," Diana said, squeezing his hand. They sat together as the stars began to appear, one by one, in the darkening sky. Around them, the ranch hummed with life, the lowing of cattle, the chirping of crickets, the distant sound of Thomas calling to his sons. It was a symphony of ordinary moments, the kind that make up a life well lived. Diana thought about the day she had walked into Beaver, alone and broken, determined never to ask for anything. She thought about the cowboy who had given her flour and vegetables and kindness, never asking for anything in return. She thought about how terrified she had been to accept his love, and how that love had transformed her. She had spent so many years believing that asking meant owing, that receiving created debt. But Quinton had shown her a different way. He had given without creating obligation, and in doing so, he had set her free. As the years went on, Diana and Quinton remained active in their community, offering help to neighbors and strangers alike. They had learned the balance between giving and receiving, and they modeled that balance for everyone around them. When a young widow lost her husband in a mining accident, Diana and Quinton quietly provided food and supplies, never making a show of their generosity. When a new rancher struggled to establish his herd, Quinton offered advice and assistance, asking nothing in return. People in Beaver came to know the Xanders as generous, but not overbearing, helpful, but respectful of others' independence. They became the kind of couple that young people looked up to, a living example of what partnership could be. Diana found particular joy in mentoring young women who reminded her of her younger self. Proud, independent, afraid to ask for help. She showed them, through her own example, that accepting kindness was not the same as accepting chains. She taught them that they could be strong and still allow themselves to be loved. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. The house was filled with laughter and music, and Diana stood in the center of it all, surrounded by the family she and Quinton had created, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. That evening, after everyone had gone to bed, Diana and Quinton walked out to the barn, as they often did when they wanted privacy. The night was clear and warm, and the stars blazed overhead like diamonds scattered across black velvet. 30 years, Diana said, leaning against the fence. It feels like both forever and no time at all. I would do it all again, Quinton said, standing beside her. Every moment, every challenge, every joy. So would I, Diana said. She turned to look at him. This man who had changed her life in ways she could never have imagined. His face was lined now, weathered by years of sun and wind, but his eyes were the same, warm, steady, full of love. I never thanked you properly, Diana said. For what? Quinton asked. For giving without asking, for loving without conditions, for teaching me that I could be strong and vulnerable at the same time. Quinton cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle. You do not owe me thanks, Diana. You never did. Everything I gave you, I gave freely, and everything you gave me in return was a gift, not payment. Diana closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. I know, but I still want you to know how much it meant, how much you mean. I know, Quinton said softly. Because you have shown me every day for 30 years. That is more than thanks. That is love. He kissed her then, a slow, sweet kiss that tasted of home and history and promises kept. And Diana kissed him back, pouring into it all the love and gratitude and joy she felt, knowing that he would accept it not as payment, but as the gift it was. The seasons continued their endless cycle, and Diana and Quinton moved with them, their lives intertwined so completely that it was hard to say where one ended and the other began. They celebrated birthdays and holidays, mourned losses, and rejoiced in new beginnings. They watched their grandchildren grow and their children become grandparents themselves. In their 70s, they slowed down considerably, leaving most of the ranch work to Thomas and his sons. But they still rose with the sun each morning, still sat on the porch each evening. The rituals that had defined their life together remained, anchoring them even as the world changed around them. One autumn afternoon, as golden leaves drifted down from the cottonwood trees near the house, Diana sat in her rocking chair on the porch, a quilt across her lap. Quinton sat beside her, his weathered hands folded in his lap, and they watched as their great-grandchildren played in the yard. We have been blessed, Diana said, her voice soft but clear. We have, Quinton agreed. More than I ever dared hope for. Diana reached over and took his hand, their fingers interlacing with the ease of long practice. Do you remember the day we met, when I ran into you outside the mercantile? Quinton chuckled. I remember you glaring at me like I had insulted you when I tried to help. I was so afraid, Diana admitted. Afraid of owing anyone, afraid of being vulnerable, I almost pushed you away completely. But you did not, Quinton said. You gave me a chance. You let me show you that not all giving comes with strings. You were patient with me, Diana said. You could have walked away at any time, but you did not. I could not, Quinton said simply. From the first moment I saw you, stubborn and proud and so determined to do everything on your own, I knew you were special. I knew I wanted to be part of your life, even if it meant going slowly, earning your trust bit by bit. Diana felt tears prick her eyes, though whether they were from sadness or joy she could not say. You earned so much more than my trust. You earned my heart. And you earned mine, Quinton said. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it, a gesture he had repeated thousands of times over the years, but which never lost its meaning. They sat in comfortable silence as the afternoon faded into evening, watching their family, their legacy, play and laugh in the yard. The ranch that Quinton had built and Diana had helped sustain was thriving, passing down through generations. But more than the land or the cattle or the buildings, what they had created was a family built on love and respect, on the understanding that giving and receiving could be balanced, that partnership meant equality, that asking for help was not the same as owing. When Diana was 74, she fell ill. It started as a cough that would not go away, and despite the doctor's best efforts, it progressed into pneumonia. Quinton stayed by her side day and night, holding her hand, reading to her, reminding her of all the beautiful moments they had shared. One evening as the sun set outside the window, Diana looked at Quinton with clear eyes. I am not afraid, she said, her voice weak but steady. I know, Quinton said, though his own heart was breaking. Promise me something, Diana said, anything. Promise me you will not be alone. Let the children take care of you. Let them give to you the way you gave to me. Do not shut them out. Quinton's vision blurred with tears. I promise. Diana smiled. Good. Because giving and receiving, remember? It goes both ways. I remember, Quinton said, his voice thick with emotion. You taught me well. We taught each other, Diana corrected. She squeezed his hand with what little strength she had left. I love you, Quinton Xander. Thank you for showing me how to live, how to love, how to be free. I love you too, Diana, Quinton said, leaning down to kiss her forehead. Always. Diana closed her eyes, a peaceful expression on her face, and slipped away quietly, surrounded by love. Quinton mourned her deeply, but he kept his promise. He allowed his children and grandchildren to care for him, to cook for him, and keep him company, and help with the tasks he could no longer do alone. It was hard, accepting help when he had always been the one giving, but he remembered Diana's words. Giving and receiving go both ways. He lived for 5 more years, staying active and involved in the family and the ranch. He told stories of Diana to anyone who would listen, keeping her memory alive through his words. And every evening he sat on the porch and watched the sunset, feeling her presence beside him as clearly as if she were still there. When Quinton finally passed, peacefully in his sleep at the age of 83, the town of Beaver mourned the loss of a good man. His funeral was attended by nearly everyone in town, and the church was filled with stories of his generosity, his kindness, his unwavering integrity. Thomas gave the eulogy, speaking of his father's love for his mother, his dedication to his family, his commitment to living a life of purpose and meaning. My father taught me that true strength is not in standing alone, but in standing together, Thomas said, his voice steady despite his grief. He showed me that giving does not create debt, and receiving does not create weakness. He loved my mother with a devotion that was both fierce and gentle, and together they built something that will last far beyond their years. Diana and Quinton were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the Crossbar X Ranch, under a cottonwood tree that had stood for generations. Their headstones were simple, bearing only their names and the dates of their births and deaths. But those who knew them understood that their legacy was not carved in stone, but written in the lives of their descendants, in the values they had instilled, in the love they had shared. Years passed, and the Crossbar X Ranch remained in the family, passed down from generation to generation. Each new owner added their own touch, but the core values remained the same: hard work, integrity, generosity without expectation. The story of Diana and Quinton became family legend, told and retold to each new generation as an example of what love could be when it was given freely, without conditions or obligations. A great-great-granddaughter visiting the ranch as a young woman stood on the porch where Diana and Quinton had spent so many evenings together. She looked out over the land, golden in the evening light, and felt the weight of history and love that permeated the place. "They must have really loved each other," she said to her grandfather, Thomas's son. "They did," he replied, "but it was more than that. They understood each other. They built a life together based on respect and equality. Your great-great-grandmother had been hurt badly before she met him, taught to believe that kindness always came with a price. But your great-great-grandfather showed her a different way. He gave without creating debt, and she learned to receive without feeling obligated. Together they created something beautiful." The young woman nodded, understanding. "That is rare." "It is," her grandfather agreed, "but it is possible. They proved that." As the sun set over the Crossbar X Ranch, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, the young woman felt a sense of connection to the ancestors she had never met. Their love story was not just a tale of romance, but a lesson in how to live, how to love, how to give and receive with open hands and open hearts. And in that moment, standing on the porch where Diana and Quinton had watched so many sunsets together, she understood that their legacy was not just the land or the family name, but the knowledge that true love does not bind or obligate. True love sets free. The story of Diana Preston and Quinton Xander became more than family legend. Over the years, it was written down and shared, a testament to a different kind of love story, one where asking for nothing did not mean receiving nothing, and where giving without creating debt was the greatest gift of all. Their lives, intertwined in the harsh beauty of the Utah desert, proved that love, when given freely and received with grace, could transform not just two people, but everyone they touched. And so the legacy continued, generation after generation, a reminder that in a world that often keeps score, the greatest gifts are those given without expectation, and the greatest love is that which asks for nothing and gives everything. The ranch endured through economic downturns and droughts, through wars and changing times, because it was built on a foundation stronger than land or money. It was built on the principle that Diana and Quinton had discovered together, that giving and receiving, when balanced with respect and love, create not debt but partnership, not obligation but freedom. And every evening as the sun set over the red hills of Utah, their descendants gathered on porches and around tables, telling stories of the woman who asked for nothing because asking meant owing, and the cowboy who gave without creating any debt. Two people who found each other in the Wild West, and in finding each other, discovered a love that transcended time, a love that proved that the best things in life are not transactions to be balanced, but gifts to be cherished. Their story ended not with their deaths, but with the beginning of countless other stories, as their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren carried forward the lessons they had learned. Love freely, give generously, receive graciously, and always remember that true partnership is built not on obligation, but on choice. In the end, Diana and Quinton's greatest achievement was not the ranch they built or the family they raised, but the example they set, that even in the hardest of times, in the wildest of places, love could flourish if tended with care, respect, and the understanding that the best gifts are those given from the heart, with no expectation of return. And so their story lives on, a beacon for all who struggle with the balance between independence and connection, between giving and receiving, between standing alone and standing together. They proved that it was possible to be strong and vulnerable, independent and partnered, self-sufficient and loved. The Wild West may have been tamed, the frontier may have moved on, but the lessons Diana and Quinton taught remained as relevant as ever. That asking for nothing does not mean you deserve nothing, and that giving without creating debt is not just possible, but the very foundation of true love. Their story, born in the ashes of loss and blooming in the harsh desert sun, became a testament to the enduring power of love given freely, received graciously, and shared equally. And in the hearts of all who heard it, it planted a seed of hope that such love was not just a relic of the past, but a possibility for the future, waiting for anyone brave enough to give without keeping score and to receive without counting the cost.